Echoes of Regret, an Izuku ex-listener fanfiction written on AO3 by Spoonful of Spice. You were sure that he would have given up on you by now. You gave him every reason to. You abandoned him when he probably needed you the most, and moved away. You used him to feel good about yourself, to feed that desire for affirmation that you didn't realize you had. What's more, upon meeting each other again, you pretended to not know him, made sure to pretend you never even met him. Childhood friends? Are you sure? You must have the wrong person. And you got away with it too. You gained far more weight since the last time you had known him, and with that weight came a grim reality that had changed your face quite a bit. You got more than one, "Is that really you?" or "You hardly look the same." It was rude, but it was the truth. A truth that you happened to use to divert your pursuer. But, of course, that had only worked for so long. Sure, you were able to dodge people hearing about your given name and somehow passed off a nickname for people to call you by. But, at some point, it did get out. Now, well, you could just get someone to believe you that you just so happen to have to look like another person. It's a lot harder to convince someone that not only did you look similar, but you also just happen to have the same name. Ugh, Midoriya. Can you just leave me alone? You sighed out angrily, rubbing your face in frustration. You didn't hear a response, but you knew he was there. He had followed you here when you nearly had a breakdown and ran off campus in the middle of the night. You raised your head from your hands slightly, only enough for one eye to fully show through. You do realize this is all because of you. You paused slightly, only then noting the unnecessary bitterness of your voice. Right? You frowned as you stared at Midoriya's back on the grassy hill at the park you two had run off to. You never noticed how fit he's become. Ever since you got into UA, you'd never had time to look at him. Granted, the last time you saw him was when you two were still kids. But the way he looked now, the way he carried himself in just these few months, had showed much more than that scrawny kid than you'd known just as a grade schooler. It was clear he had different values and was far more matured. An interesting note, seeing as you parted with harsh words. You really need to grow up. Now that you had to think about it, now that you thought about the entire situation that landed you here in the first place, you wonder who had really grown up. After all, it was you who had a panic attack when he confronted you about hiding your identity from him. It was you who, instead of taking the time to calm yourself, only rushed out of the dorms and escaped into the night. If anything, he probably assured the others that he'd bring you back safely before rushing headfirst into the dark tendrils of your quirk. It was an odd, very family-oriented quirk, and the biggest drawback being that you never knew the strength or intensity of your jump. You got to the point where you could at least will the direction of the general space jump, but when you're emotionally unwell, the jump may as well have been a dart hitting a random point on a map. It ended up being unexpectedly powerful. One that had ended up taking you several cities away, never mind the fact that it took you to a place you hadn't been before, a feat that normally isn't possible. In the same sense, it could have just as easily dropped you into the ocean, or it could have sent you plummeting from thousands of meters in the air. And yet, Midoriya had run after you, more than likely knowing this possibility. You were an ass to him. You gave up your friendship, lied about even ever knowing him, and even going so far as hiding basic information about yourself just to do it. It was even bigger ass to him, simply because you didn't want him even ever getting the idea of it, to the point where you had to fight with Todoroki about your behavior. He was reasonably stunned when word of your given name got out in front of Midoriya because you were getting reckless in the midst of being an asshole. Couldn't even offer a defense when Midoriya called you out on your lie. You ended up having a panic attack in front of your class, and then proceeded to ditch the dorms and run away from your troubles instead of facing them head-on, recklessly activating your quirk in the process. And Midoriya still went after you. You really did think that he would have given up on his crush on you by now, but for some reason, even if he wasn't fully enthralled, he was still fixed on you. You really couldn't understand why. You were alone. You were meant to be alone. And his instance made it hard to accept that reality. Midoriya, you froze, your throat feeling like it had closed up after the first two words got out, as if it was trying to reverse the mistake of even opening your mouth. What were you going to say? Is there anything you could do in this situation? I know. You finally heard him respond, as he lowered his head and plucked at some grass. Huh? You weren't sure you heard him. Even if you did, you were even less sure what he was referring to. Come again? I know it was my fault, he sighed, a slight crack in his voice. He brought up one of his arms to his face and rubbed the sleeve of his jacket against it. I know you hate me, just please do me a favor and try not to say it. He paused, and you barely heard the sniff that followed. It's just hard enough knowing, but I don't think I could ever take it to you if I said it out loud. His voice sounded so solemn, but amused, ending in a humorous chuckle. He brought his hand to his face, rubbing his sleeve against it as well, before giving his cheeks a slap, standing and dusting off his shorts. When he returned, it was clear he had been crying, his eyes being puffy and rubbed raw. Now, we should probably figure out how to get back to UA, he continued, the usual analytical tone as if nothing had happened. It had an odd, nasally undertone. By now I imagine Aizawa has noted their disappearance, so he probably is searching in the immediate area. You didn't pay attention to his babbling so much. You didn't really pay attention to nothing at all. You were staring at him with his hooded eyes and swollen heart at his words. He thought you hated him. Part of you rationalized that that was the point. To get him to stop liking you, to stop sticking to you. One of the easiest ways to do it was either to make him hate you, or make him think that you hated him. Yet somehow hearing it was hard. Like Midoriya had said, it had a certain sting that you didn't want to hear out loud, that you didn't think would hurt this much to hear out loud. This was good. This was meant to be the point. He was going to keep his distance. He was going to be safe. That was part of your plan. And most importantly, your quirk wasn't ever going to hurt him again. You're crying. You blinked away a few tears that had formed in your eyes and pulled yourself out of the train of thought, surprised that you had zoned out. Crouching in front of you was a very worried Midoriya. His hands hovered near your cheeks, his brows knitted, and his own glossy eyes asking for your permission to touch them. It confused you until you realized that they were wet. Very wet. It wasn't just a few tears that welled up in spite of you. Your faucet was turned all the way on. It was evidenced by the fact that your entire neck and the beginnings of your t-shirt was wet. You didn't know when he noticed himself, but regardless, you imagined it would be concerning for anyone to see another person crying that much while staring motionlessly at the sky. You wanted to tell him that it was okay to touch you. It had been 3 years since you let anybody touch you for fear of another unfortunate accident. You wanted to tell him that it would feel nice in the moment. You wanted to tell him that it would be good to ground you during your panic attacks. You wanted to tell him that you would appreciate it so very much. It would be bliss, even just for that night, ever again. But it's getting late. Was the only thing that came out of your mouth, much to his disappointment. He hesitated for a moment, his hands getting closer despite not answering your request. His fingers just barely brushing your cheek. They were so close that you could feel the body heat radiating off of them. The look on his face was dismal, lip quivering, on the verge of tears again. He pulled back, instead standing up once again, wiping his face on his sleeve. His free hand dug into his pocket, pulling out a handkerchief and handing it to you. You took it without a thank you and began to wipe your face, even though tears were still spilling over your cheeks. I texted Ochako, so it seems like the teachers are coming for us. So just hang tight, I guess. Midori offered with a half-hearty smile. You nodded feebly in response as you dabbed away at your shirt. You were too tired to talk, though. You were probably going to have to if you didn't want Midori to be punished for your mistakes. It was frustrating, to say the least. Hey? You looked over Midori with an eyebrow cocked, but immediately regretted it. His eyes were still puffy, but now they were determined, resolute. He had come to a conclusion about a decision, and you were certain you were not going to like it. He lowered his head, contemptuously as he continued. I think I changed my mind. He paused and glanced up, waiting for you to see if you were going to respond, but noticing your firm decision not to speak, he went on. I want to hear it. You don't have to say it now if you don't want, but, I want to hear you say you hate me. Your eyes widened before you could stop yourself, and you couldn't help flinch as he looked into your eyes. Then I'll leave you alone. Just moments before, you were certain he got the hint, but in a matter of minutes, in a moment of weakness, your situation had only become more complicated. Thanks so much for listening.